Good evening. Thanks for joining us again and welcome to the second year of our webinar series, Inspiring Ideas from Experts in the Field. The webinar is a new workshop format for NOFA Mass, and it's our hope that we can make quality farm management education easily accessible to everyone, everywhere. My name is Anna Gilbert Muhammad, and I'm the Food Access Coordinator and Webinar Coordinator for NOFA Mass. My email is anna@nofamass.org. Feel free to contact me with feedback about this webinar or if you have any questions about the food access program of NOFA Mass. Before we start tonight, I would really like to thank our sponsors, Frontier Natural Products, Lancaster Agriculture, and UMass Risk Management Crop Insurance Education Program for supporting the production of this series. I'd also like to thank New Entry Sustainable Farming Project and Tufts Friedman School of Nutritional Science and Policy for providing access to the WebEx software that we're using tonight for this webinar. Lastly, many thanks to all the NOFA Mass staff who have helped make this workshop possible. If you are not a member of NOFA Mass, please consider joining to support our education and policy work. You can visit our website at nofamass.org to learn more information and to become a member. Tonight's presenter is Hannah Traggis. She's a senior horticulturist for the Massachusetts Horticultural Society, and her topic tonight is crop production for seeds, creating a secure food system. The format of tonight's webinar will be a presentation, which will be followed by a question and answer period. And this is where you can become interactive in that question and answer period. In order to do that, just type in your question using the chat feature, which is at the top right hand of your screen. You can also text me your questions directly to my cell phone. You can text me at 413-214-1237, and we'll get the question to tonight's presenter. As a housekeeping item, if you can keep yourself on mute, that'll be wonderful. And during the course of the presentation, if you can let me know, we'd like to know how many people are actually viewing with us tonight. So if you can type in if it's just you, if it's two, if it's three, or if it's more that are watching it, that'll be fantastic. So at this point, I am going to give the presenter role over to Hannah so she can share her screen with us. Sit back and enjoy tonight's presentation. Hannah, it's all yours. Hannah, don't forget to take yourself off of mute.
For the introduction, much appreciated. And good evening, everybody out there in Seedland, Bill Braun and I like to call it. So tonight I want to speak to you all about what's really a large topic, and this is really the beginning of seed work that NOFA Mass is beginning to support for New England and for the northeastern part of this country in general. And so the aim of the talk tonight is to give you an overview of all the parts and pieces that really go into what our food system is and what it could and should be, and what role we play as farmers and scientists and community members and eaters and people who shop at farmers markets and grocery stores. So without further ado, I will be discussing with you becoming a regionally secure food system. And we'll talk a little bit more about the seed piece, but I want to talk about what really goes into the meaning of each of the components of that title. A little background on myself. I have been a horticulturist for my entire life, and since the age of 3, I've been growing and observing plants, and a lot of those plants have been edible plants that in my parents' vegetable gardens. I went to school to study marine botany, so I learned a lot about growing seaweed and seaweed aquaculture as an undergraduate, and then I pursued a degree in plant physiology and plant breeding from the University of New Hampshire, and most recently have spent the last 3 years as senior horticulturist at Massachusetts Horticultural Society. My main love in life, though, is really talking to people about food and about healthy food. And When I think about healthy food, I think about food that is not only nutritionally complete for your bodies, but is something that satisfies you beyond just your nutritional needs. It satisfies who you are as a person, who you are as a member of your culture, as a member of our society. And I think all of those are really important as we look at the future of food security in this country and the world. So, becoming a regionally secure food system. So what does that entail? Well, I mentioned that there are many components to this. And outside of the food component is that cultural preservation. Here in the Northeast, we're really kind of at the hotbed of cultural diversity across the country. I mean, we are a country of immigrants and Native peoples. And across the country, you see areas where there are larger populations of immigrants. And in Massachusetts, we're really lucky to have an incredibly beautiful diversity of people. And so we need to identify what cultures are present, and we need to identify the foods that are important, and we need to be able to connect those crops into our food system. And then there's the crop itself, and we need to talk about the varietal integrity of the crop. We need to learn as farmers how to maintain those varieties and restore those varieties, and we need to learn how to grow the seed for those varieties in New England. We need to learn how to adapt those varieties to New England so that we can not only grow more diverse foods, but also grow the seed for those foods. And so this entails an enormous amount of commitment and cooperation from all the members of our food system, from the farmers, from the seed keepers, from the community of eaters that provide those feedback loops that tell the farmers what they want them to grow. So I love to ask everyone what is a seed, and I'm actually quite used to presenting in front of a live audience, and so this usually becomes a question and answer session, so I might play that little game myself. But I'd love for you all to just consider for a moment, I'll give you about 8 seconds, just consider what do you think is a seed, and what is inside of a seed, and what are the components of a seed that allow it to be this completely miraculous living organism that a lot of us take for granted and don't really understand. So as a good farmer who is thinking about growing seed, you should understand the components of a seed. And there are only 3 very simple components. But how you treat the crop that you grow to produce that seed is going to make an enormous difference in the health of that seed and the health of those 3 components. So the first component is the seed coat, and that protects that seed for months, years, decades, and sometimes even millennia from the elements, and it protects what's inside of that seed. So seed coat is actually a very specialized structure that flowering plants evolved to produce about 350 million years ago. The next important component of a seed is on this slide entitled the endosperm. And the endosperm is actually a nutrient reserve for the little embryo that's inside the seed. So the third component of a seed is that embryo. And if you look at the screen, you will see that the embryo is divided into 2 main parts, the radicle and the cotyledons. that entire tiny structure is just a dormant plant waiting to awaken and grow into a corn plant or a magnolia tree or whatever. They all start as these tiny, tiny little dormant embryos inside a seed. And so once that embryo begins to wake up, it is hungry and it needs to digest the nutrients out of that endosperm. So as we move forward through NOFA-MAS and put together more workshops to help educate farmers about producing seed, we'll really be helping you understand how to treat your crops in a way that you can create the healthiest seed possible, taking into consideration how all three of these key components of a seed are produced. So why organic seed? And we're talking about regional food security, and so you're going to hear me talk about locally adapting crops. So we want to adapt crops to grow in our local environment. And why is that important? And why is diversity important anyway? I mean, we go to the grocery store and we see a great big huge bin of green bell peppers, and we see a great big huge bin of yellow potatoes, and right beside it is a great big huge bin of red potatoes. Well, there are thousands of varieties of potatoes, and only 2 of them ended up in your grocery store. So we really should be asking ourselves, why? Why do we only have that choice? We think we have full shelves to select from in our grocery stores, and their choices are really, really actually quite small. So, let's see. So as organic farmers, we have a lot of choices to make. And most organic farmers have chosen the path they're on for a couple of reasons. And one is a negative reason, and one is a positive reason. We can either choose to be on the path as organic farmers because we reject modern industrial agriculture, chemically and resource-intense agricultural practices, or we can consider ourselves organic farmers because we want to take a more holistic and healthy approach to farming more ecologically and with a better consideration for the sustainability of our environment. So why organic seed? We're organic farmers, and a lot of us don't have a lot of choice. So we open a seed catalog and we see a variety that we want to grow, and that variety is actually oftentimes only available through conventionally produced seed systems. And so that means that that seed came from an agricultural system that was chemically intense, that is large-scale industrialized process, and then we take that seed and we grow it in our organic system. And it's kind of counterintuitive for really satisfying why we're actually organic farmers. So I want to talk a little bit more about crop diversity. Like I said, this is going to be this is just an overview of all the different components going into our regional food system. So we talked a little bit about the cultural diversity in Massachusetts, and I'm going to touch a little bit more about that in a few minutes. But if we consider crop diversity from just standard ecology, the more diversity you have in a system, the more stable that system is. I mean, in a rainforest, in our deciduous temperate forests around us, in New England, in prairies and grasslands, the more species you have present in your environment, the more stable that environment is. And that it's no different in our food system. The more diversity we have in the crops that we have access to eating, the more stable our food system is around us. So the Global Crop Trust has done an extensive amount of work worldwide to help identify and help protect crop diversity. And I think that in New England, we would be very well served to follow in their example and strive to produce some of the cultural and crop diversity in our own region. It's well documented that we are losing biodiversity in our global food system. For an example, China has lost 90% of the rice varieties that they grew by 1950. And in Mexico alone, they've lost 80% of the corn varieties that had been grown for over 8,000 or 9,000 years. So in the last 100 years of agriculture, we see the loss of, anywhere between 50 and 90% of the diversity in cultures worldwide. And when you think about what's happening in those countries and the loss of biodiversity there, you might want to ask yourself what's happening as those immigrant populations move from those countries into new homes across America, and the loss of the crop diversity that they're able to bring with them and have access to when they come and live here and they go to the grocery stores, and there's food that just doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense to how they evolved and in the environment they evolved in, and the foods. We know today that our microbiomes in our guts are inherited, and we know that the heritability of that microbiome in our guts is generations and generations. And therefore, when you take a group of people and you take away access to the food that their bodies and their ancestors evolved in, all of a sudden they don't have access to that food anymore. It's really not necessarily the healthiest thing to ask those bodies to go on functioning. So there are a few key areas where crop diversity is critical. So it's critical for food security. If we rely on just one type of crop, or rely on just one variety of that crop, that one variety of yellow potato that we see in the grocery store when there's actually thousands of varieties of yellow potatoes worldwide, but we only grow one or two of those commercially. If we rely on just that one variety and a disease comes through and wipes that out, then there's no more of that yellow potato. But if we had a choice of 15 different types of potatoes and one of those potatoes was no longer able to grow, we'd have a lot better security in knowing that we have more choices. We could still eat potatoes. That's just an example. Climate change today is such an enormous subject, we could spend years talking about it instead of doing something about it. But I just want to mention that climate change is a new selective force in nature. And so what that means is that in natural environments, climate change is now driving the evolution of species. And it's actually, in a way, putting a lot of pressure on our non-natural environments, such as farming, as well. And when we take a variety that was bred for a certain environment and certain environmental parameters 20 years ago, and we try to grow it today, we're having a lot of difficulty growing a lot of those foods. We're seeing, chaotic weather events coming around in the late summer that is beginning to wipe out crops that would not have succumbed to those pressures when they were initially introduced into our food system. I mentioned earlier that diversity of is just leads to environmental stability. As organic farmers, we are beginning to think more and more about ecological farming practices. Many of us are studying agroecology. We're learning to run our farms as these beautifully diverse ecosystems with pollinator swaths and, bits and pieces of the farmland have been set aside for native plant and animal species. And that's all to increase the biodiversity on our farms, because we know that that is going to increase the ecological stability of not just our farm, but the town community that we live in. Another reason why crop diversity is critically important is nutritional security. There are over 100 million people in the world that they get enough calories, but they are still severely malnourished. These are countries such as Haiti and in sub-Saharan Africa, where the main source of food is cassava. One plant is the major caloric source for the vast majority of the populations in those countries. And each day, many of the people in those countries get enough calories, but there's absolutely no nutritional content. And so we still see horrific diseases such as kwashiorkor in small children and other amino acid deficiencies. So that is a very important example of why if there were a little more diversity in the food choices, they would have a lot more nutritional security. But because they're relying on one food for their nutrition, they're getting very little out of it. Crop diversity also across the world helps steel societies against poverty. Most societies, most cultures around the world, agriculture is the economic foundation. And therefore, having a diversity of crops and putting control of those crops into the hands of the people and the farmers helps ensure against poverty. And having crop diversity ensures that we can employ more environmentally sustainable agricultural practices. And that touches on a topic that I'll be discussing in just a few minutes in the state of modern agriculture. The vast majority of the food produced in this country is produced through very large-scale, industrialized, conventional methods. And those methods really employ growing just a very, very few varieties of plants that were bred very specifically for those methods. Those plants that were bred for modern industrialized agricultural systems don't do well in organic systems. They do not do well in agroecological systems. And that's because they need tons of chemical fertilizers. They need fungicides. They need herbicides. They need massive amounts of water. And none of those are ecologically or environmentally sustainable practices. We cannot, as organic farmers, we already understand this, but we cannot continue to pour chemicals into the ground in which we grow our food. We simply can't do that. We have been destroying the environment for 100 years. And as organic farmers, I think we all have a very strong commitment to stopping doing that. The more diversity that we have and the more choices of plant material we have to grow, the more we can begin to employ these more sustainable practices. So why organic seed? Why locally adapted? Well, we have a lot of choice. This is a slide. I showed this at a conference a few years ago, and a number of people in the audiences, it was an ethnically diverse audience, and a number of people responded to different peppers. Some people pointed out the peppers in the center, some people pointed out the serrano peppers, other people pointed out the habaneros. And different people identified with the different types of peppers that are there. So one size does not fit all in our food system, and it shouldn't. We need choice. We just need choice just to be happy, let alone healthy. So a bulk of the work that I'm doing with NOFA and have plans to continue doing is from the plant breeding aspect and from the seed production aspect of our food system. So why locally adapted? This is a pretty interesting view of the country, and it really shows you that the country is not just one environment. In the Northeast, we have between 50 and 100 inches of rainfall a year, and we have very, very cold and very dry winters, followed by very wet springs, dry summers, and wet falls. And as you start traveling west across the country and you hit the prairie lands, they have somewhere between 20 and 30 inches of rain. These are areas at the same latitude as we are here in Massachusetts, but we see very different temperature fluctuations throughout the year, very different amounts of rainfall, and just very different climatic considerations. When you get into the Pacific Northwest, you have really a rainforest. So you have an area that can get 100 to 200 inches of rain a year and has a lot less daylight. The days are a little bit shorter than ours, but they're also quite a bit cloudier. So the amount of sunlight and the amount of heat that they have is very different from our climate in New England. And so if we take seeds and we take plant varieties that do well in the Midwest or the Pacific Northwest, we can't really expect them to perform well and feed a lot of people in our own region. And so we really need to begin adapting crop varieties to our region. Otherwise, we rely on other parts of the country and other parts of the world to dictate the seed that we can grow. And therefore, they dictate the varieties that we can grow. And those varieties don't necessarily satisfy our nutritional needs, nor will those varieties satisfy our cultural needs. So climate considerations for crop production. So here in New England, this is going to be a pretty common scene for the next several months. We are covered with frozen water that is not available to our plants whatsoever. We're going to see temperatures dipping down to -10 to -15 and -20, and we have plants with root systems that have adapted to that sort of environment, but it's a very inhospitable one. When you take into consideration if we want to start talking about satisfying some of the cultural diversity and growing food crops for our region, and we want to consider where most of our immigrant populations have come from, a few statistics can't really kill us right now. Currently in Massachusetts, 16% of our population is foreign-born. An additional 14% are native-born with at least one parent, and usually two parents that are foreign-born. So of the foreign-born population that lives in Massachusetts, we see at least 15 different countries spread all across the world. But a lot of those countries are tropical regions, are from climates very, very different than New England. And if we want to start growing crops that will help feed those populations, then we need to consider adapting some of those crops to our environment. So this quote from Gary Nabhan really sums up a lot of the things that we're striving for with NOFA Mass these days, and we really want to strengthen what our community can do for themselves. And this picture was actually taken in northern Vermont. A lot of you may know a farmer named Jack Laser at Butterworks Farm, and he has been a dairy farmer for his entire life. And he decided a long time ago that in order to have the healthiest cows, that he needed to be growing the food that he feeds them throughout the winter. Really, really long winters in New England, and cows are not kept out to pasture. So he began growing his own grains and adapting them to Vermont, to our region. And he began doing that with a bunch of plant breeders. So this is a method that I'm going to talk about in a few minutes called participatory plant breeding. And it's a method that I think is going to work really well for farmers and for our food system in New England. And it's one you're going to, as you follow the NOFA Mass Seed Workshop series, you're going to hear a lot more about it. I want to say a little bit more about organic seed in general. So we've talked about crop diversity and we've talked about cultural needs for food, but we're organic farmers, and what we really need is not only culturally appropriate seed, but we need organic seed. And there's so many reasons why. 5 years ago, people just thought it was good enough to buy whatever seed you could get your hands on, and at least you were growing it organically and you were growing organic food. But we are realizing more now than ever that we need to be growing seed that's not only produced in organic systems, but was bred for organic systems. And that's really, in my opinion, the number one reason to be using organic seed, is to take it that next step further, that organic seed was bred for organic systems. It was not bred for conventional systems. There's a lot of research out there today, a lot of scientific publications that will tell you that organic agriculture is nowhere near as productive as conventional agriculture. And in a way, those papers are actually true. And there's a lot more counter-analysis coming out that's realizing that the organic farms are using seed bred for conventional agriculture. And we already talked about that conventional agriculture being chemically and resource intensive, and organic farms don't do that. So of course those varieties don't do well in organic systems. There's new research out that's actually showing that the use of crops bred for organic systems are actually outperforming and outproducing conventional agriculture. So we have a lot of work to do, and we have a lot of challenges to meet. So the state of organic seed as we know it right now, the Organic Seed Alliance is an incredible resource for you. I have a link to their webpage a little bit further in this presentation. But they canvassed organic farmers across the country in 2015 and launched the State of Organic Seed Report in 2016. And some of the key findings are encouraging, that more organic farmers are actually planting organic seed. At this point, we have approximately 27% of organic farmers are using 100% organic certified seed, which is incredible. And the quality of that organic seed is much higher than it used to be. And a lot more organic farmers are beginning to save their own seed and maintain their own varieties. And that's what's really exciting in the Northeast, is to see our incredible community of farmers getting interested in adapting and saving seed for organic systems. But there are major problems in organic agriculture today and the seed that's available. As far as commercial quantities of organically produced seed, it just doesn't exist in large enough numbers. And we're still seeing some of the largest organic farms, some of the huge organic lettuce operations in Salinas Valley, for instance, are not necessarily using organic seed because they can't find enough of it, and they don't find enough of it in the varieties that suit what they need to produce for their business. So we're hoping to begin to start changing that by educating you all to produce your own seed. So one of the best ways for farmers to begin producing their own seed, and I want to go to a quote from Bill Tracy, who is the USDA sweet corn breeder at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. And he said, once you grow a seed, you are a plant breeder, whether you like it or not. And so as a farmer, when you make that commitment to start growing a crop, not just for food, but also for seed, you need to realize that you're also taking on the responsibility of a plant breeder, and that you'll be selecting the healthiest plants and the plants that meet your criteria as a farmer, and those are the plants you'll be selecting to save seed from. So this is Jack Laser, as we saw him in his combine on this farm a few slides back. And he has been undergoing his grains participatory plant breeding project for a number of years. And he is one of the farmer participants. There are other farmers in the area and region that are part of this project that are helping to more broadly adapt these grain varieties across New England. So they're not just adapted to Jack's farm, they're adapted to a number of farmers across New England, so the New England environment in general. There are other players in the participatory plant breeding method, and the other key players are plant breeders. So on this screen to the left, you see Heather Darby, who is an extension agent specialist from the University of Vermont. She's just an incredible person and an incredible researcher. In the center slide, you see Jack Laser talking to John Navazio. And John Navazio is the head of the plant breeding department at Johnny's Selected Seeds. He was the senior scientist for the Organic Seed Alliance and helped found the Organic Seed Alliance with Matthew Dillon a number of years ago. And John has been just an enormous knight for organic agriculture for the past several decades. And on the right, you see Jack Laser standing with Steve Jones, who is just one of the most phenomenal organic plant breeders in the country. He works with wheat and grains of all types. And this model of farmers working closely with these academic plant breeders is just an incredibly powerful method of truly adapting crops to our environment. And there's a lot of reasons why this sort of association between these groups of people is important for adapting these crops. And one thing that I've observed is the incredible relationships that are formed. John Navazio will admit that farmers are the smartest people he's ever met in his life. And, you know, the farmers also usually form very, very close relationships with the scientists that they work with. And they both bring really important contributions to the table. But participatory plant breeding is really mainly driven by the farmer themselves. The farmer knows the crop. They love the crop. Usually farmers pick a crop that speaks to them. It's a crop that they can't wait to get out in that field every day and look at. They know the crop, they know how to grow it, they know how that crop responds to their environment, they know how their farm environment is changing as our climate changes. They also know how, they know the market. So they know the people that buy their food, they know the chefs that use their food. At the farmers market, they meet their grandmothers that give them the recipes from their grandmothers for why they're buying that food. So the farmers are really one of the key components in the feedback loop that centers around each particular crop that they grow. And so farmers actually determine the major selection criteria, and these are the breeding goals. Because again, we're not just saving seed, we're breeding plants. We're adapting plants to our environment, and that means we are breeding plants. And the plant breeder brings an enormous amount of knowledge in the traits. So the farmer knows the crop and determines the selection criteria, which are the traits that they want. And the plant breeder will know how to get those. And so together they form this incredible system that leads to producing some incredible varieties. So at NOFA Mass, we have been taking up the torch of seed work for the last couple of years. But why do seed work at all? Again, here's this quote from Bill Tracy: "Once you grow seed, you are a plant breeder whether you like it or not." So why do the seed work at all? It's not an amateur sport. It requires a lot of dedication. It requires the thirst for knowledge, to learn something new, to learn a new cultivation system. So as farmers, up until now, we've really been concerned with getting a beautiful crop, getting that produce to a market, getting it to their customers' plates. But when we grow crops for seeds, the crops are in the ground for anywhere from a week to 2 months longer than normal. The plants are treated very differently from the very beginning. And so learning to grow crops for seed is learning a little bit, really kind of relearning how to grow that plant in general. So in the summer of 2016, the NOFA Mass Summer Conference, we offered a seed saving workshop and talked about the genetic integrity and maintaining that genetic integrity. We talked about the biology of seed production, flowers, how seed is produced in a flower. We also talked about mating systems in plants and considerations that farmers need to take for placing those plants and allowing for proper cross-pollination. Last winter, in the 2017 Winter Conference, Bill Braun of Ivory Silo Farm offered a participatory plant breeding workshop where he discussed various considerations for on-farm seed production. And in the summer of 2017, Bill Braun, John Navazio, and myself offered a full-day intensive workshop entitled On-Farm Seed Production, where we discussed everything from basic seed biology to various mating strategies. We discussed participatory plant breeding methods and a number of other items. And that was just the tip of the iceberg, and we have a lot of plans coming up. So the future of seed work for NOFA Mass, in January of 2018, we have a seed sovereignty listening session that is a full-day workshop. We have Adrian Shelton from Vitalis Seeds, the Organic Seed Alliance will be there. Heron Breen from Fedco Seeds will be there. Bill Braun from Ivory Silo, I will be there. And another, Ken Green from Hudson Valley Seed Library, I believe will be there. We're still working on enticing him. But a number of important seed players will be at that listening session, and that's January 27th. Additional workshops that we plan to offer, we will have ongoing plant biology workshops talking about the biology of seed production, but we'll begin talking more about trialing varieties and beginning a plant breeding project on your farm. We'll talk about working with open pollinated varieties and how to breed those varieties to be genetically resilient enough to perform well across various climates. We'll talk more about participatory plant breeding methods, and we'll talk about working with biennial crops and seed production. We'll be offering workshops on finishing variety. You'll spend several years adapting a crop to your farm and to New England, and with the goal of producing seed and distributing that seed back into New England. And so we will be talking about the legality of that, how do you release that variety? How do you distribute that seed? We'll also be talking extensively about the difference between growing seed crops versus fresh market varieties. We'll be talking about seed cleaning, post-harvest conditioning of that seed, how to handle that seed, and how to store that seed, and how to get that seed to a seed company where it can be sold and remain healthy and vital. We'll talk about intellectual property rights, and we'll also talk about various techniques for cross-pollinations. And as we go through each one of these workshops and present them, 10 more topics will spring up out of each of those. So keep your eye out. There's a lot more work that NOFAMAS will be doing. There's a lot of resources that will help you along your way if you want to understand a little bit more about the state's food system and the New England food system. The Massachusetts Food System Plan has a lot of information there. Frank Mangan, who is a researcher at the University of Massachusetts, Stockbridge School has World Crops Program, and he's been working to adopt varieties from around the world to grow in New England for years and years and years. He's done a lot of exciting work with crops from all over Africa and Southeast Asia and all throughout Central and South America. The Organic Seed Alliance has an enormous amount of information to support farmers, to give them the knowledge, to help them with trialing, help them with plant breeding, help them with selection. Farmer to Farmer podcast, there's some great ones out there with John Avazio and Frank Morton from Wild Garden Seeds, and just a number of other really informative podcasts that if you're on a long drive are a lot of fun to listen to. The Global Crop Trust has a lot of really valuable information about why preserving our plant genetic resources and why being able to share those plant genetic resources is critically important to maintaining diversity in our food system. And I say that as we see, 5 and 6 global corporations merging together into 3 and 4 global corporations that control over 90% of the plant genetic resources available to farmers and plant breeders around the world. There's very little diversity left that we can preserve, and so every step we take to preserving that is just one more piece of insurance we have. And also keep your eyes tuned to the NOFAMAS Continuing Seed Workshop series. This is a little bit more information on the Massachusetts Food System Plan. And if anyone wants to get in touch with me, my email address is at the bottom of this page, and I'm about to hand the mic back over to Anna.
Hannah, thank you so much. That was an extremely wonderful and informative presentation, and I've had a chance to see this a couple of times, and it seems like every time you present it, it gets more and more in depth. So thank you for your time tonight and for giving us such wonderful information. Again, to our viewers out there, just to let you know, if you want, you can type in your questions into the chat feature, which is in the upper right-hand corner, or you can text them directly to me at 413-214-1237. Now, at this point, I have a question that came in to me. Are you presenting at the Winter Conference, which will be January 13th at Worcester State University? Will you be talking about seeds and seeds for crop production at all?
I will not be. We've been focusing on putting together the Seed Sovereignty Day, which is January 27th. And that was supposed to be a seed field day back in October, and we ended up postponing that to this winter in an effort to get a couple of more participants in that. So as far as I know, I know I will not be presenting. I believe that Bill Braun might be presenting, and I just haven't touched base with him on that yet. But,
okay. Yeah. Very good, very good. In your presentation, you mentioned about ways to adapt crop varieties for seeds. Can you take that, do a slightly deeper dive? And we're looking at some of our beginning farmers and local farmers, and possibly, backyard gardeners. If they have their favorite variety, how do they create that adaptation?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, assuming that anything we buy, any crop, any variety that we grow out of a seed catalog is going to do well in our backyard, is we're often surprised once we make that assumption. It looked great in the catalog. The catalog might have been from another part of the world or another part of the country, but we'd heard of this variety. We really want to eat it. We really want to grow it so we can eat it, and so we might grow out a number of seeds from that packet. And say we're growing lettuce, and we might grow out 20 different seeds of that one variety. And every day as we observe that lettuce and it's growing, we're going to notice that each of those plants looks different from the other. And each of those plants is responding to its environment differently. Genetically, it might have a slightly different blueprint for how it can respond to its environment. But if we took those exact same 20 plants and had planted those seeds in a different environment, let's say we planted them in Bellingham, Washington instead of Hubbardston, Massachusetts, we might notice that different plants are doing well. So those plants are responding to their environment differently. Some are going to do better in Washington, and some are going to do better in Massachusetts, all from the same seed packet. What we want in Massachusetts are plants that do well in Massachusetts. And so as a farmer who wants to save seed, we're going to rogue out. We're going to remove the plants that are not doing well. We don't want them to cross-pollinate. We don't really want their genetics in the seed that we're saving as we try to shift that plant into being able to do well in our climate. Lettuce isn't the best example because it's a self-pollinator, but if we're growing something like peppers, for instance, if you grow out 15 pepper plants, and you notice that 7 of them just can't get out of the ground, or they're succumbing to disease pressure, they're coming into bloom later than the other peppers of that same variety. Those just are not peppers that are doing well in our environment, and therefore those are not ones that we want to save seed from. We want to save seed from the ones that do better. So that's a very basic explanation of adaptation, and it makes it sound like it can happen in one season in your backyard. And that's just a snippet of the picture of what it takes to truly adapt that variety. As we talk about the participatory plant breeding methods and on-farm crop adaptation, this is something that will take anywhere up to 5 years. Depending on the crop, it could take 7, 8, or 9 years. And you actually, if you're making the commitment to truly adapt that crop, you're going to be making a commitment to growing out a lot more members of that variety. So if you were trying to adapt peppers, one pepper variety to your environment, you would be growing 50, 60, 80 plants that you would be able to observe. So actually for a farmer, this is fairly reasonable. When you think of a 300-foot bed row that's 3 or 4 feet wide, and how many pepper plants you can get in that bed row, you can certainly grow enough plants to observe and make selection from. But you don't want to just look at how a plant does in 1 year, because every year is different. Last year we had no rain for 5 months straight, and this year we've had more than enough rain. So you really want to be growing these plants out for a number of years, selecting the best ones from each year's, and allowing those to actually cross-pollinate with each other. And eventually, over a few years, you'll have a very well-adapted variety to your environment.
Okay. In one of your slides, this is from another viewer, are there participatory plant breeding programs that are here in Massachusetts or in the New England area in general?
So participatory plant breeding projects come up on a case-by-case basis. And right now we are incredibly fortunate to have plant breeders such as John Navazio who are in New England now, because he is not only willing, it's one of the primary ways that he looks to breed plants. So we're incredibly lucky to have a researcher like him in our area, and to have other plant breeders that are interested in working with farmers. And usually these relationships spring up out of a mutual interest for various crops. Oftentimes a farmer might go to a university extension agent that they know well and say, hey, look, I know that this seed, this variety of corn that I've grown for 15 years, I know the seed catalog's going to drop it. I don't know what to do. So sometimes projects start like that. So participatory plant breeding isn't necessarily a program that exists that you can just sign up for. If you're interested in it, I'll be working with Bill Braun at Ivory Silo Farm, and you just need to dive in. Email me and I can hook you up with a number of different plant breeders who are interested in working with farmers in this area. And I think that's really the best way to try to get involved in one. Tell me the crop that you're growing, where you're growing it, and what your breeding goals are, and we can try to start creating some of these participatory networks.
Okay. And our final question is going back to adaptation. Sometimes, certain seed stocks or certain types will go extinct or cross with another one and morph. What are some of the ways, and I know this is a pretty extensive question, but what are some ways to help maintain the integrity of particular seed, if it's your favorite spinach variety or lettuce variety or tomato? Briefly, what are some of those ways to maintain the original integrity of that?
Yeah, that's a great question. And it really comes down to understanding, as a farmer interested in saving seed, that you are also a plant breeder. And understanding that crops and there's genetic drift in a crop, especially open pollinated crops. There's a lot of genetic diversity in that crop, and so therefore you can see those changes over time. How a plant breeder can help a farmer maintain that variety is by understanding. So sometimes when we're making selections, there are unintended selections that we're making in a crop. And so just the better that you can understand the genetics of that crop, and that's where, talking to a plant breeder or working with a plant breeder can help you. But also, one of the simplest ways that you can really stem off that drift from happening is by growing large populations of those crops. So if you have a favorite variety of spinach and you want to save seed from it, make sure you're growing out 200 plants or 300 plants. And that you're really, when you're going to save seed from those plants, make sure you're really taking out a lot of plants that just don't cut it. And if you only grow 25 plants and you are desperate to save seed from that, you're not leaving yourself a lot of plants to select from. So you really do need the population numbers. John Navazio published a book a couple of years ago called Organic Crop Breeding, and it's completely accessible for anyone to read. It's very easy to understand, and he talks about the number of plants to grow by crop type, and he talks about that varietal maintenance in that book if you want to be able to read a little bit more about it. We'll also be talking about that a lot in our upcoming workshops. That'll be a major, major focus, is that adaptation and how it's done.
Okay, great. Well, you know, going back to your workshop that's coming up at the end of the month, at the end of January 2018, I really encourage everyone to get out and check that workshop out. You can actually sign up on NOFAMAS's website to get more information and to actually get registered. In addition, you can go directly to the website to register for the winter conference that's coming up January 13th, 2018 at Worcester State University. Hannah, thank you so much for your time tonight. I know you're traveling. We really appreciate everything. You have her contact information. You can always contact me, Anna Gilbert Muhammad, at anna@nofamass.org if you need her contact information. And let's work together to work on our seed sovereignty because we see these things can lead to a more secure food system. Next, at the end of this month, actually, right before the end of the year, we'll close out the year with Julie Fine. She'll be talking about cover crop varieties and cover crop cocktails. It will be on the same webinar station, if you will. Please look for that notice coming out. You can see this webinar again as many times as you like with Hannah. It will be uploaded to our NOFAMAS YouTube page. In our archives, you can go directly to YouTube and pull up NOFAMAS videos, or you can go directly to our archive page by the end of the week to look directly at this video. Thank you, everyone, for your time tonight. Have a great holiday season, and we'll talk to you next time. Good night.